Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us on today's webinar. And here with a very timely topic as it's starting to warm up. It's getting close to spring, at least here in Georgia anyway. But yes, today I am joined by Jennifer. She's a VP at Kickbox. Jennifer, tell us what you do.
I work with clients on deliverability issues, so they'll come to me to help with warm-up or inboxing issues or reputation issues, and I walk them through what they're currently doing and strategies to help improve so they can get to where they need to go.
Awesome. And I'm LB. I'm a strategic advisor here at SendPost and SendX, and I also work on clients' deliverability issues and help folks warm up, though we've automated quite a lot of that here. So you know what, let's start with a question. How often is it that folks come to you with a problem that started in warm up?
In my past job, I think it would happen much more often. In this one, I actually get problems that are all over the place, but they're definitely issues as we dive in and we get to where we need to get to with the questions, because a lot of times they don't realize that it starts in warm up, and I'll say, well, when did this begin? And as you start to peel back and go back into history, you'll find, oh, perhaps warming wasn't done probably the best way for your situation, and then we can go back and kind of retool it and rework it and do it again.
Yeah, and our goal today is to give you a recipe in Jennifer's, some very important layers of the deliverability problem. And honestly, it really feels like that sometimes. You're peeling back the layers and it's just nested problems sometimes. How do a lot of people end up noticing that they have a deliverability problem, do you think?
Often it's a big change. I often get my open rates are down. We're not getting enough traffic to our website. We used to be here and now we're here. And usually it's a comparison or an expectation that they should be performing a certain way and they're not.
Absolutely. And tears, yes. One of the comments for our audience. Absolutely. So our goal today is to give folks a recipe for a warm up. I'm going to rattle off a list of ingredients, and then we're going to get into the instruction portion of the recipe that tells you how to use them. So the ingredients, you have your data, so your email lists, you have the sending platform, your sending domain, your DNS setup, your content, and whatever your schedule is, i.e., do you have a contract ending that's driving this warm up? So let's start with the last one first, scheduling. So let's say I know that my ESP contract is ending at the end of the year. When should I start my RFP, and then how long should I plan for my warm up? If, let's say, I send 10 million email a month.
If you are looking to actually change providers, you want to be at least a year out, in my opinion, because there's a lot that goes into looking at different providers and whether you really do need to change them. So that's one question you need to ask is, what is the reason for this? If you're having deliverability problems, you have to really figure out, is it you or is it them? And often you'll take those same issues with you when you go to the next ones, if it really is you. So just changing isn't going to necessarily be the right answer. But if you're saying it doesn't have the tools I need, that's sometimes a good reason. But I like to say a year, because in the RFPs I've been a part of, there's so much that you don't even realize that you need to ask until you start getting into the tool and what it can and cannot do and the limitations and the data and how it manipulates the data, which is different from platform to platform. And surprisingly, even within the same company and there were different platforms, I'm like, oh, this one does it this way and this one does it that one. This is how the targeting works in this one and this is how it works here. So you really have to test it, really, and that takes time to put it through the ringer. Then you have to consider with 10 million, it really depends on how conservative you are with your warming. It also depends on how good your data is. So if you have really strong data with people or the majority of the audience is highly engaged, you'll be able to go a little faster than if you have a large audience that's not as engaged. Or if you have 10 million, it might be that you might not be able to mail that 10 million. So I wouldn't have a specific timeline for that without knowing what the makeup of that audience is well as it all Gmail or is it all Microsoft or B2B? That will also change your warming plan. But what I would say is, as you start to really figure out what that is, you want to add a buffer of a month. Again, I'm very conservative, but I like the month because if you have blips along the way, you need time to correct them and make adjustments. You don't want to get to the end of your contract and you're not done warming yet. I like to have an overlap between both platforms. So if something does happen, you can fall back on the old platform while you're fixing whatever issue it is you need to fix.
Yes, absolutely. And so much to unpack there. So many important points. I think one of them that I want to highlight that Jennifer said, don't bring your problems with you to a new platform. And we're going to go over some tips on how to not do that. And part of it's your data. I think some super important points. I said 10 million a month, and Jennifer gave a great answer because yeah, you can't, it depends. Okay, well, what's the size of your engaged list? Do you email unengaged contacts? How frequently? What's the peak daily volume that you need to hit? So I think that's one big key that you need to know is what's like the most you're ever going to email in a single day. And then that's kind of the volume you're trying to warm up to. And also, I got to give a shout out to your colleague, Matt Burnout, who isn't here, but he's the one that taught me this point. Especially, in the United States, I think you need like 30 days, for links in the old platform to still be active. And also in Canada, I believe it's actually 60 days. And Europe, I'm going to admit, I'm uncertain. But as Jennifer said, super important. You do not want to still be in the middle of your warm up when your contract ends. And so absolutely plan ahead, give yourself extra time, just accept, kind of like moving houses, there's going to be some overlap where you're paying for both. We just have to accept that.
And I think ESPs knows there's going to be an overlap even if you're not sending. So even your contract might be I'm done sending here, but then there is an overlap for legal reasons to make sure the unsubscribe links work. Most importantly than other links is your unsubscribes are there. You can still process anyone who's hitting reply unsubscribe, that those features are still working, and making sure that data feeds are still synced while this process is happening.
Super important. Yeah. Don't forget to bring over your unsubscribes that keep spooling up in your old platform. Even if you've stopped sending, you need at least 60 days. And, in a lot of cases, you can even automate that to just relay into the new platform. I'll say shout out to us here at Sendex. We make it super easy. You can upload a list and then you can select that list for a bulk action to say, hey, add this to my unsubscribes, add this to my complaints, add this to my hard bounces. Like basically we operate those. We make it really easy for you to import into those suppression lists and maintain like the reason as to why someone was suppressed, which brings me to our next topic, something I know you all know a lot about at Kickbox, which is data. What are important concerns for preparing your data for warm up?
The first thing is you want to understand who's engaged, because that's going to be where you want to start. And engagement can be many things, especially with all the proxies coming in that really hides who's truly engaged. So that can make it hard. If you're not certain, start with clicks, those who have actually engaged with links. That still could be a false because you've got security appliances doing those things, but it is a pretty good one. Opens, although they're flawed, they at least indicate that the person receiving the mail is likely getting it to their inbox. So there's probably not a huge negative signal, although I have seen some not so good accounts open as well. So it is difficult. So starting with clicks and moving out your dates of like when's the last time they clicked. If it was 5 years ago, that doesn't necessarily matter. So an action alone doesn't mean much, but an action with a time frame can be really helpful. If you have external data points, purchases, stuff like that, that can be helpful. In isolation, they're not as helpful too, because someone could click and do stuff on their website but never engage in their email. So there's so many things to look at when you're really kind of analyzing your data. Looking at the emails sometimes is helpful. I've found clients recently have a lot of emails that are just, when you look at them, they're not good emails. And then when you look at the data associated with them, they're not good emails. So making sure you're not sending to bounce, and that's where verification can come in. If you're curious, like, do all these emails that I have on my list, are they still mailable? Doesn't mean that verification will help you determine what's a good lead or a good email in terms of will they interact or not, but it will at least tell you like this email is no longer mailable. Don't pay to mail it. Don't bring it over and save it unless there's a legal reason to keep like the history behind the email. But definitely like picking through your data and really understanding all the aspects behind it, how you collected it, because your signals may tell you one thing, but then if you look at, I bought it, doesn't mean it's a good lead either. So there's lots of aspects to look at when you're thinking about data.
Yeah, and one thing I would also say is this is a good time to check your site security and make sure that you're protected against bot attacks. It's a best practice. Solutions like Kickbox allow you to wire up what I call point of collection validation. So right even in the form, you're rejecting folks that like it's an invalid address, or if it looks like it's a threat of some kind. Because one thing I'm seeing a ton of lately is e-commerce shops with low cost items getting attacked by credit card fraudsters. So they're
Mm.
giving a garbage address because they don't want anybody to know they're testing this credit card on your e-com shop. I saw one lately where their abandoned cart flow hard bounce rate was between 50 and 30%. It waffled. And you don't want to bring those leads over. Sit down with your data. I would say, also your sending platform, you got to make sure you get that properly configured and load in the data properly. One thing to be aware of when you're migrating off a platform, a lot of times they don't make it the easiest to get
Mhm.
your unsubscribes, your undeliverables, like soft bounces that they determined were undeliverable. Sometimes that's kind of hidden. Make sure you look at all the nooks and crannies, because I've seen situations where I was working for an ESP, a client comes over and their first email, 20% hard bounces. And that's really painful to recover from.
Because to that point, ESPs often have some level of a suppression list, whether it's client level or global. But addresses become on this suppression list because either they hard bounce, sometimes they soft bounce too many times. And if all you're bringing over is an email and its subscription status, you're going to have a lot of pain there. So understanding all the different statuses that can belong to an email. Is it mailable? Is it consent? And I've had a client who brought their list over and their consent, but then the consent in the new platform didn't match, and they had all these duplicates and they weren't sure which consent was accurate. So making sure that mapping is correct is really important as well, so that you're mailing the people who still want your mail and not those who have fallen off or no longer want it.
Absolutely. And, definitely, I think that's super important. Just as important as hopping in your DNS and setting up your sending domain properly is loading the data in properly. The next thing also is content. What do you think folks need to look out for? Is there anything different they should do with their content when they're migrating between platforms? Any thoughts there?
Some of the things I suggest, and you don't have to do it, but if you're getting a new address, for some clients, they've actually sent a unique email before they bring over their customers and say, hey, you're going to be hearing from us. They don't do it the day before, but they prepare them and say, this is our new address, add it to your address book, look for us in your spam folder. Some will just add it as a banner, and they'll do it in preparation with maybe even a month out or something, so that customers can start to make those changes, because not everyone's going to read every one of your emails. So if they do it over time, eventually, hopefully enough people will see that to make the change. And this is really helpful if you're changing domains, especially if you're rebranding or something like that too. For some of my clients, they'll have the same content they launch off both platforms. And I think that's fine, as long as it's expected and there's nothing like crazy different. But something that ties with the data piece is decisions you have to make are, once you bring someone over, are they staying over? Or are you kind of bringing them over and kind of mixing and matching? There's a lot of decisions to be made there around how you flag consent and making sure you keep up with that. With warming and content, some will say, I don't have enough content to mail every day. But then you can also make unique segments, and you can still use that same content as long as it's strong content and a strong audience. Otherwise, the content could get a negative reputation. So it's all about, are your customers expecting this in the way you're going to mail while you're warming?
And I love that pro tip of, while you're still on your old platform and you're planning things out, absolutely make sure that you're notify your customers, and especially let them know what the new address is going to be, especially if it's changing, if maybe you're going to be on a new subdomain or something. So we've covered the instructions here, which are: step 1 is prepare your data, step 2 is your email authentication in the DNS.
Mm-hmm.
And then step 3 is, you really are going to do this probably simultaneously, but also set up the monitoring. If you have set up your Google Postmaster Tools, set up your SNDS, your Yahoo Sender Hub, all of that stuff. Out of curiosity, I want to talk about the new version 2 Postmaster Tools a little bit. I'd be curious to know your take, and especially how you would use it during like warm-ups.
Yes, but really quick before, because I
Sure.
don't want to forget this point.
Yes.
When you're doing DNS work, please take notes of everything you're doing, what you're adding, and why. Because I have a lot of clients I work with that have a million entries, and I'm like, I don't know what this is for. But we need to clean it up, because that's a vector for abuse if you have old records that sit in there. and you're no longer on that platform, you're still giving that platform permission to mail with your domain. So document everything as you go in there. If you don't know what things are, see if you can research and then get a document for that. Also be mindful of what ESPs provide you for instructions. There's some outdated instructions out there, and if you're not sure, ask. And it's not a problem to ask. Most experts are happy to say yes or no to something. There's a lot of SPF records where the ESPs are like, add this SPF record, but they never use your domain in the return paths or in the area where the SPF would be looked up. So, or they'll say, use this DMARC record and you override the current one that you have that's doing all the reporting and you don't need to. So
Ooh,
be
that's my
mindful.
biggest pet peeve. That's my biggest pet peeve. Don't overwrite people's, especially like I keep seeing platforms telling people to put DMARC records on subdomains without checking to see if there's one on the parent. And that ends up cutting you off from like information that could be very valuable. I use DMARC, info to like watch how my ramp is going. But yeah, I absolutely, that's such a great point. Document your DNS change log for
Yeah.
sure.
And I think if you were to add something to the subdomain, make sure you still have your reporting address associated so you have visibility across the board. But again, just ask. There's a lot of nuance and things you might not think about because you're getting information, you just want to implement it. But sometimes we have to pause and say, is this how we're supposed to actually implement it? To your question about GPT v2, the old version, I only really looked for the domain and IP reputation. It's kind of this thing that I kind of been stuck on. It's a vanity thing that I need to know. But really what I'm looking at with the newer version, compliance, you want to make sure you're in compliance all along the way. If you're just starting up, there should be no reason you're out of compliance. You should have all those things set up. All reputable ESPs are designed to be set up for compliance for the senders. I look at spam rates as well to make sure we're staying in line there. If you're getting a lot of spam rates right off the gate, that's concerning to me because you're supposed to be mailing most engaged. I'm looking at authentication. And I'm looking at all the aspects, to be honest. If there's anything that doesn't look normal or isn't like 100% right off the gate, I feel like there might be a problem because when you're first starting, you're on your best behavior with warming. So you should be doing everything right. You should be no matter what. But if anything's being caught right then, there's a problem with setup or your audience or something like that. And you need to pause, revisit, and then go back once you found the issue.
Absolutely. And I don't know about you, but the extra decimal point for spam rate makes me unreasonably happy, especially since, the reporting threshold is zero point 0.1, and then the excessive threshold is 0.3. If you're not getting any complaints at all, you're probably not hitting the inbox. So being able to see there's like at least a little bit of complaints, but don't go above 0.1. And also, I guess I would say too, the delivery errors. I think, trust your ESP, but verify.
Mm-hmm.
And make sure that it's not sending too fast or something.
And I like that call out because I did work with a client once where their ESP wasn't showing delivery errors, but Google Postmaster was. And it had nothing to do with the ESP, but I think there was some forwarding or something weird going on. And Google was seeing something that wasn't being surfaced to the ESP. So the ESP did nothing wrong, but there was some really bad data in there and it was causing some delivery errors that weren't going back to the ESP. If there are weird numbers in GPT, that's also a sign like, is something going on that's not quite right?
Yeah, absolutely. If you see something unexpected, that's a source direct from Google. It's not to say it's infallible, but definitely check your ESP, check your settings and things like that. Because I feel like the delivery errors have gotten more diagnostic as well. The delivery errors, they've gotten a little bit in the Google Postmaster Tools. It'll tell you when you're hitting rate limits versus, suspected spam, etc.
That's a good question to ask when you are warming up with your ESP. Can I see the bounce message? Because a lot of them categorize them, but they're not enough information to really understand what the true problem is. So if you can get the actual messages, if you even have a pathway to get that set up ahead of time. So if everything looks good, maybe you don't need it, but you could say, hey, if I want to diagnose a delivery error and I want to see the bounce, how do I do it? Because I want to know for warming so we can check along the way if there's issues.
Absolutely. We've gone through a few, start with your most recently engaged. That is the next step. And I show me the NDR, show me the actual report, and make it easy, make it digestible, preferably a CSV so I can throw it in a spreadsheet. But yes, so painful. So we've gone with set up monitoring, then start with your most recently engaged. I feel like we covered this pretty well already in the first part. I'll hit a couple highlights. As Jennifer said earlier, super important, start with like clickers, because that's a stronger signal of engagement and probably less likely to be bot driven. And then what I do is I'll like alternate. I'll go, if I'm doing a really big list warm up, I'll go, okay, I'm going to start my last 5 days clickers, and then I'll work through that. And then I might go out to the last like 10 days or 15 days clickers. And then I might go back to my openers, people that opened but didn't click, and go, okay, give me 1 through 5 days, then give me the next 5 days, etc. And I'll work my way, but always, typically go through the clickers first. Any other pro tips do you have in terms of those starting with the most engaged?
I think it also depends on, again, on your data to know how strict you want to be with the time frame, but the time frame is really important to keep in mind. And the hardest part I have for some clients is they'll say, I don't know. So that's when they don't have that data. That's when I'm like, all right, then we need to be conservative. You might at least have sign up date or something like that. So there are other data points if you don't have engagement, and you can go from there and just go slow. See, because if you start out and you don't start well, don't keep pushing. Stop and figure out what's going on. That was one of the biggest issues when you asked me earlier that I seen from as a result of warming. The client was going, they were warming, and their performance just tanked. And instead of stopping and saying what's going on here, they kept going. And then it's much harder to recover than just pausing and saying, let's reevaluate and then start again.
Oh man, I think there's like 3 super key nuggets out of what you said there, which is one, if there's something wrong, don't keep pushing, because you're just going to cement the problem further. And I think the other really key point around data is, the less data you don't have, the opens, clicks, the more conservative you have to be in your warm up, and so the next point we're going to say, for your warm up is go slow and low. What would be your recommended like start points, do you think, for like Gmail, Yahoo, Hotmail, like day one?
I'm conservative with every client. I don't care how good they are. We're going to start like 50 per provider. Sometimes I'll go to 100 or a little bit more. I've seen warming plans where they start at 1,000 for some of these, but I don't know my clients' data the way that they do. If we have the time, I say just start slow so we can really assess how it's going. Depending on what I was able to wean from their past performance will really determine what I do moving forward. But I start really low. And if things are going well, then I will ramp up a little faster. But it gives me a nice touch base on those first few sends. Sometimes if you do start too low, it skews things in a way that's misleading. You could go a little bit more. It's really hard because for me, I have to like see the whole picture before I really get started on stuff. But I would say for me and my preferences, start super low.
I think 50 is super reasonable. I've seen lower plans. I've seen also much higher. I think 1,000. You said that my blood pressure went up. I was like, ugh, I don't know about that. Ugh. And I love that. I think that you're like, I don't know their data like they know their data. And I think this comes back to one thing I tell people in email all the time, right? Is the best way to know anything about what you're doing in email is to test it. And sending the data and seeing how it performs, that's the test. So last point here on the way out, you had mentioned while we were prepping is don't be afraid to adjust the plan. What do you mean by that?
So often when you start working through warming plans, either a consultant or the ESP will say, here's your warming plan. This is how much volume for provider and your engagement levels. It's okay at some point, depending on performance, to say, let's push harder, or we need to scale back, or we need to pause for a week. So being able to adjust, you often will get a plan and say, I can't do daily, or I only can mail like 3 campaigns this week, or whatever. It's okay to adjust it. You get your base, and then you make tweaks so that it fits what your marketing schedule is or what your staffing schedule can do. Because with all this, you want people on staff with customer service and all this kind of stuff, being prepared, knowing things might be different and change.
The fact your warming plan will need to be customized to you is one reason you're going to want to ask an expert. I would say, to give a little shout out to us here at Sendex, we've automated a lot of the warming process, and we do use the context from within your data. That's not to say there's not still some room for experts as well, but definitely automating things and being responsive to, things are going great at Gmail, but they're not going good at Hotmail. You've got to be able to, have the visibility in your platform to see that, And then also, you got to be willing to do something about it. Now, I don't like making knee jerk reactions. Like maybe if I see 1 day dip, I might go, okay, that could be a fluke. But definitely, if I see a couple days, 3 days showing sends problematic, we're going to take a step back on that.
Right. And to your point about the automated sending, I've worked with a number of platforms that do that. I do think it's a great feature to help, especially those who don't have visibility into a lot of stuff or don't have the bandwidth to do a lot of the segmentation pieces. I will say that if you can ask the provider, do you have data on what's going off of my domain and IP versus what's going off a shared domain and IP if they're kind of taking it all in and launching? Are you able to separate out there? Am I able to control it in any way? So for example, if Hotmail's having issues, can I make controls, decisions there to help move it along or pause or slow something down? And ask them too, like, how fast are you warming this? What is the, because there's a formula behind it. So ask what they're doing. And then if you don't like that pace, perhaps maybe select fewer people so you can control it in some way as well. Because you can still put your segmentation in and limit in that respect.
Ours, we actually show you the whole schedule. So you can load up your campaign and it shows the whole schedule. But I think you're very right. Those are all questions you should absolutely be asking if you're going to go through some automated warming. Jennifer, thank you so much for being here. It's been, I think, a great episode. I hope people got a lot from this as far as all the kind of concerns and things that, you have to deal with when you're warming up. It's no small operation, which is why kind of part of the point you said is you generally don't want to migrate off if just because you're having deliverability issues. Probably easier to fix them in place. But if you've got to migrate for functionality, other reasons, cost savings, etc., this is what you're going to be looking at.
Thank you for having me.
You're so welcome. Thank you for joining us, everyone. And we'll be getting this posted up online, and there'll be a PDF going out to folks, I believe, tomorrow. Thank you so much for joining us, and have a great day, everyone.